Money does not change suddenly, it evolves quietly. Then one day, you wake up and realize you are living inside a system you never chose. So let me ask you something uncomfortable. What if the money you use today was not designed for your freedom, but for stability of a system you were born into? Not to make you poor, not to make you rich, but to make you predictable. Because long before you ever saw a Naira note, money was already changing form across centuries, slowly shaping how you think, how you work, and even how you survive. And if you've been following this series closely, you will start to see a pattern that most people never notice. We didn't start with money. We started with survival. In the beginning, there was no currency, only human energy. Strength was value, skill was value, survival itself was the economy. Then came the discovery that land could produce more than human effort alone. And suddenly, value stopped being momentary and became something that could accumulate. From there, societies stopped chasing survival and started building structure. But structure always creates division. Some controlled land, others worked it. And for the first time in human history, wealth stopped being equal. Then came exchange. First simple, then complex. Barter failed not because people were careless, but because systems outgrew human simplicity, so value needed a language. And that language became cowries, metals, and trade systems that stretched across continents. But once value could travel, it also became easier to control. And that is where episode 6 revealed something deeper. Control of trade became control of people. Control of people became control of production. And control of production became control of entire economies. Nigeria, like many regions, was pulled into a global system where value was no longer just created locally, but extracted, processed elsewhere, and returned in a different form. Even currency itself was no longer locally defined. It was managed externally. Then came episode 7, where everything changed again. Not land, not trade, but something far more personal. Time. Factories replaced farms. Schedules replaced freedom. And for the first time, human life was divided into hours, and those hours became income. Education systems emerged not just to teach, but to prepare humans for structured productivity, and the salary system was born. A system where survival depends not on what you create, but how long you can work inside someone else's structure. Now pause for a moment, because everything we've studied so far leads to one quiet but powerful realization. Money has never been just about value. It has always been about control of systems, and systems evolve. Which brings us here to episode 8, the moment Nigeria enters a new identity, not just politically, but economically. The moment where money is no longer just traded, no longer just earned, but officially defined by sovereignty itself. The birth of the Naira, a symbol of independence, but also a question most people never ask. If a nation controls its currency, does it automatically control its wealth, or is currency just another layer in a system that is already deeper than most people understand? Because what happens next will reveal something most Nigerians have never been taught about what owning your money really means. In today's world, money feels simple. You work, you get paid, you spend, and you repeat. But what feels simple on the surface is actually a deeply engineered psychological loop. Because for most people, money is not understood as a system. It is experienced as emotion. When salary enters the account, there is relief. When it reduces, there is anxiety. When someone earns more, there is comparison. And slowly, without noticing, money stops being a tool and becomes a measure of self-worth. In many Nigerian homes, money is not just survival. It is identity. It determines respect. It determines confidence. It even determines silence in conversations. A person earning more is often assumed to be ahead in life, even when their system is fragile. And a person earning less is assumed to be behind, even when they are building something scalable. This is where the illusion begins. Because what most people call money awareness is actually salary awareness. A mindset shaped around monthly income, not value creation. So people grow up believing 3 silent rules. If you have a job, you are secure. If you have salary, you are stable. If you save money, you are safe. But none of these explain where the system itself comes from. or why it behaves the way it does, so people don't question it. They adapt to it, and adaptation feels like success, even when it is limitation. Now think about this deeply. A student in Nigeria is taught to aim for a good job. A graduate is trained to seek stable income. A worker is encouraged to hold on to salary as security. But very few are ever taught to ask, why is income tied to time? Why does money stop when work stops? Why is financial survival dependent on constant activity? And more importantly, who benefits from a system where most people must keep working to keep earning? Because once you start asking these questions, you realize something uncomfortable. The system is not broken. It is functioning exactly as designed, not to trap people, but to organize them. To structure productivity, to predict output, to stabilize economies, but in doing so, it also limits how most individuals experience wealth. And this is where the psychological conflict begins, because you are told to work hard, but not necessarily to understand the system. You are told to earn more, but not necessarily to build something that earns without you. So people stay inside the loop, work, earn, spend, repeat, and call it life. But beneath that cycle is a deeper truth most never see. Money is not just what you earn. It is how the system recognizes your value. And if your value is only recognized when you are actively working, then your freedom is automatically limited by time. Which means the real question is no longer, how much do you earn? But rather, what system are you earning inside? Because once you understand that, money stops being emotional and starts becoming structural. And that shift changes everything. Let's pause everything for a moment. Because what we are about to look at is not just mathematics, it is a mirror. And for many people, it is the first time they will see how their income system actually behaves in real life. So imagine this carefully. A person earns 5,000 per hour. Nothing extraordinary. Just a normal skilled worker in today's economy. They work 8 hours a day. That gives them 40,000 per day. Now multiply that across a full working month. 40,000 25 days equals 1 million monthly income. At first glance, this feels like achievement. It feels like progress. It even feels like financial stability, because in many environments, 1 million a month is considered success. But now, we go deeper than appearance, because this is where most people stop thinking. There is something hidden inside this structure, something almost invisible, but extremely powerful. Time. There are only 24 hours in a day. Not negotiable, not expandable, not flexible. And inside those 24 hours, you are not just working. You are living, sleeping, resting, recovering, thinking, moving, which means your productive hours are naturally limited. Even if you are disciplined, even if you are hardworking, even if you are extremely focused, you are still human. And that means one thing, your income is tied to time, and time is tied to your body, so no matter how valuable your skill becomes, there is a hidden ceiling you cannot break, a ceiling not defined by ambition, but by biology. Now think about this carefully. If income only flows when you are physically active, then income stops when you stop. No exceptions, no negotiations, no delays. That means your financial system has one condition, your presence. And anything that depends on presence has a limit. Now let's stretch this thought further. Imagine two people. Person who works inside this system. They earn 1 million every month. But every naira is tied to their working hours. If they stop working for 30 days, their income becomes zero. Not reduced, not delayed, completely paused. Now imagine person B. They create something once. A skill system, a digital product, a service structure. Something that continues to produce value even when they are not physically working every second. At first, they may earn less, maybe even far less than person A, but something important is happening in the background. Person B is not exchanging time. They are building structure. And structure behaves differently, because while time resets every day, systems accumulate. Now let's make this even more real. Person who works harder every year. They increase hours. They increase responsibility. They even increase stress. But there is a limit they cannot cross, because they are still inside time. Meanwhile, person B builds slowly. One system, then another layer. At first it looks insignificant. But over time, something begins to shift. Because systems do not restart every month, they compound. And this is where the emotional realization begins. Many people are not poor because they are lazy. They are not stuck because they are uneducated. They are not struggling because they lack intelligence. They are limited because their income structure depends on something they cannot expand: time. And once time becomes the foundation of income, freedom becomes mathematically restricted. Now pause and think deeply. If every hour of your life has a price tag, then how much of your life are you actually selling just to survive? Morning hours, afternoon energy, evening exhaustion. Years become cycles. Cycles become decades. And without noticing, life becomes structured around availability, not freedom. Now here is where the truth becomes uncomfortable, but necessary. The salary system is not designed to punish you. It is designed for efficiency, for predictability, for order. But efficiency and freedom are not the same thing, because a system can function perfectly and still limit individual expansion. So what looks like stability is actually controlled output. And what feels like security is often structured dependency. And this is why two people with the same salary can end up with completely different futures, not because one worked harder, but because one remained inside time, while the other started thinking beyond it. So the real question is no longer about income. It is no longer about effort. It is no longer even about education. The real question becomes, are you building inside time, or building beyond it, because everything changes the moment your money stops depending on your presence? Let me ask you something, not as a viewer, but as someone living inside this system every single day. If tomorrow morning, you decide not to work for the next 30 days, no office, no business activity, no active effort, just you and time, will your income continue, or will it stop? Pause. Don't answer quickly. Don't guess. Think about your actual life, your real structure, your current reality. Because this question is not theoretical, it is personal. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now the answer, for most people, income stops. Not gradually, not partially, completely. And that single truth reveals something deeper than most people are comfortable admitting. It means your income is not independent. It is conditional, conditional on your presence, conditional on your effort, conditional on your time, which means something very important. You are not just earning money. You are maintaining a system that requires you to stay active to survive. Now let's go deeper. Because this is where many people misunderstand what they are experiencing. They call it hard work. They call it being responsible. They call it hustle. But beneath all those words, there is a structure. And that structure says, if you stop, you lose. Now imagine this in real life. A worker gets sick, a trader cannot open shop. A freelancer loses access to clients. A salary earner loses a job. What happens? Income disappears. Not because they are not valuable, but because their value is only recognized when they are actively producing. And that is the hidden design of a time-based system. Your value exists, but it is only rewarded when you are present. Now compare that to something else. A person builds something once. A system, a product, a network. A structure that continues to deliver value even when they are not physically involved every moment. If they pause for 30 days, value may reduce, but it does not disappear completely. Because the system continues to operate. And this is the dividing line most people never see. One life is sustained by effort. The other is supported by structure. One requires constant motion. The other allows moments of stillness. One creates income through activity. The other creates income through design. Now bring this back to you. Not theory, not philosophy, your actual life. If your income depends on you showing up every single day, then your freedom is already limited. Not by lack of ambition, not by lack of intelligence, but by the structure you are operating in. And this is where the identity shift begins, because the goal is not to stop working. The goal is to stop being fully dependent on work. The goal is not to reject income. The goal is to understand how income behaves. So you can design something that works with you, not something that controls you. Now here is the deeper question most people avoid. If you continue like this for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, Will your life expand, or will it simply repeat? Because time does not just pass, it compounds patterns. And whatever system you are inside today, if unchanged, becomes your future. So now the real question is no longer, do you work hard? It becomes, what is your work building for you? Because if your work only pays you, it sustains you. But if your work builds something beyond you, it can eventually free you, and that realization is where everything begins to change. Let's go back, not too far this time. Just a few decades ago, because what happened here is still shaping your financial life today. Political independence 1960, the illusion of full freedom. In 1960, Nigeria stood at a historic turning point, a moment that generations had hoped for, a moment that felt like arrival. After decades of colonial rule under the United Kingdom, Nigeria became independent, no longer governed directly from abroad, no longer officially under foreign political authority. For the first time, the country could raise its own flag, sing its own anthem, speak in its own voice, and decide its own direction. It was a moment filled with pride, relief, expectation, because independence meant something powerful, control. Or at least, that was what people believed. For the average Nigerian at the time, independence was more than politics, it was emotional. It meant, we are now in charge of our future. It meant, our decisions are now ours. It meant, our growth is now in our hands. But beneath that celebration, there was a deeper layer most people did not see. A quieter reality, one that does not show up in speeches, or ceremonies, or national celebrations. Because here is the truth: history does not always explain clearly. Political independence is not the same as economic independence. You can remove external rulers, and still remain within external systems. You can gain authority, but not full control. So let's slow down here, and ask the question most people never ask. When Nigeria became independent, what exactly changed, and what remained the same? Yes, leadership changed, decision-making structures changed. National identity became stronger, but something very important stayed in place: the financial system. The structure of money, the way currency operated, the way value was measured and controlled. At the time of independence, Nigeria was still using a currency system tied to the British structure. The West African monetary framework, which had been designed during colonial rule, did not disappear overnight, it remained. And this is where things become very important, because money is not just a tool for spending. Money is control of value, direction of trade, measurement of economic power. So if your currency is still linked to another system, then your economy is still influenced by that system. Think about it this way. Imagine you are free to make decisions, but the tool you use to measure value, to trade, to build, is still controlled externally. Are you fully independent, or partially dependent? This is the silent gap between freedom and control. And this is where many nations struggled after independence. Not just Nigeria, across Africa, across former colonies. Because the visible chains were removed, but the invisible systems remained. Now here is where it gets even deeper, because most people assume, once a country is independent, everything resets, but that is not how systems work. Systems are not erased, they are inherited. So Nigeria inherited administrative structures, trade relationships, economic patterns, and most importantly, a financial framework that had been designed not for internal growth, but for external coordination. And this created a quiet tension, a contradiction, a nation that is politically free, but economically transitioning, trying to define itself, trying to take control, trying to move from being part of a system to controlling its own system. And this is where the real question begins to form. If Nigeria is now independent, should its money still be tied to its past? Because money is not just currency. It is identity, it is control, it is sovereignty. And until a nation controls its own currency, its independence remains incomplete. So now, a new realization begins to grow, slowly, strategically, inevitably. Nigeria does not just need independence in politics. It needs independence in money, in value, in economic direction. It needs its own system, its own structure, its own financial identity, and that leads us into the next phase, a decision that would redefine how Nigeria sees money forever. Alright, now we move from realization to intention. Because once a nation begins to question its financial dependence, the next step is inevitable. The push for monetary sovereignty, the need for control before creation. After 1960, Nigeria was politically independent, but something still felt incomplete. Not loudly, not publicly debated by everyone, but quietly understood by those who were paying attention, because independence had raised expectations. People believed, we now control our future. But the deeper thinkers, the policymakers, the economic planners, they began to ask a more uncomfortable question. Do we really control our economy if we don't control our money? And that question changes everything, because money is not just used within an economy. It defines the economy. It determines how trade happens, how value is measured, how growth is directed. So if that system is not fully yours, then your decisions are not fully yours. At the time, Nigeria was still operating within a monetary structure influenced by colonial design. The currency system in use was tied to frameworks established under British rule, managed through institutions like the West African Currency Board. Now understand what that means. This was not just a financial body, it was a system of control. It determined how much currency was in circulation, how money entered the economy, how it was backed, how it related to external currencies. So even after independence, the flow of money was still influenced externally, and this is where the tension becomes real. Because a nation trying to grow needs flexibility, needs control, needs the ability to respond to its own challenges. But when your currency is externally structured, your options are limited. Your response time is slower. Your priorities are not always aligned with your internal needs. So Nigeria faced a critical decision. Not emotional, not symbolic, but deeply strategic. Should we continue operating within a system we inherited, or build one we control? Because here is the truth most people don't see. You cannot fully shape your economic future using someone else's financial architecture. Now let's bring this closer to real understanding. Imagine this: you run a business, you make your own decisions. You choose your strategy, but the pricing system, the payment structure, the currency you use, is controlled by someone else. No matter how smart your decisions are, you are still operating within limits. That was Nigeria's position, so the conversation began to shift. From political independence to economic sovereignty, from governance to control of value. And this is where a very important institution enters the story, the Central Bank of Nigeria. Because before you create your own currency, you must first build a system that can manage it, control it, stabilize it, and guide it. The creation of a central bank is not just administrative, it is foundational. It means this nation is ready to take responsibility for its money. Because controlling money is not just power, it is responsibility. You must decide how much money to print, how to manage inflation, how to support economic growth, how to stabilize the currency, and if done poorly, it can create instability, but if done well, it creates long-term economic strength. So Nigeria stood at a crossroads: continue with inherited structure, or step into financial responsibility. And this is where the mindset began to change, slowly, deliberately. Because now the goal was no longer just independence. It was ownership. Ownership of value. Ownership of direction. Ownership of economic identity. And that realization leads to the most defining moment in this episode. The moment where intention becomes action. A decision that would reshape everything. The creation of Nigeria's own currency, not just as a tool, but as a statement. We are no longer just participants in a system. We are now builders of our own. In 1973, when money became identity, after years of transition, planning, debate, and growing awareness that true independence required more than politics, Nigeria made a decision that would define its financial future. In 1973, Nigeria introduced its own national currency, the Nigerian Naira. At first glance, it looked simple: a currency change, a replacement. Old money out, new money in. But beneath that moment was something far deeper. Because this was not just about changing notes. It was about changing control, changing identity, changing who defines value. Before this moment, Nigeria had been operating with the Nigerian pound, a currency tied historically to British monetary structure, which itself was influenced by the legacy of the United Kingdom. So even after independence, the symbol of money still carried the imprint of the past. Now pause and feel this, because symbols matter. Money is not just a tool. It is psychological. It shapes how people think, how they measure value, how they see themselves. So when a nation changes its currency, it is not just updating economics. It is redefining identity. The introduction of the Naira said something powerful. We are no longer operating within someone else's monetary identity. We are defining our own. And this is where things become even deeper, because the Naira was not backed by gold. It was not tied directly to physical commodities. It was something different. Something modern, something more complex. It was fiat money. Let's break that down simply. Fiat money means money that has value, because the government says it has value. Not because it is gold, not because it is silver, but because it is trusted. So when you hold a 1,000 note, its value is not in the paper, its value is in the system behind it. The authority of the government, the stability of the economy, the trust of the people. And this is where responsibility becomes real. Because when you control your own fiat currency, you also control how much money exists, how it enters the economy, how it affects prices, how it shapes purchasing power. This power sits primarily with institutions like the Central Bank of Nigeria. And this is where many people misunderstand everything. They think having your own currency automatically means strength, but that is not true. Having your own currency means you now carry the responsibility for how that currency behaves. If managed well, it creates stability, growth, confidence. If mismanaged, it creates inflation, instability, loss of value. So the birth of the Naira was not just freedom, it was a test of leadership, economic understanding, policy discipline, long-term thinking, because now there was no external system to blame, no colonial structure to point at, no foreign currency framework to rely on. Now the question became, what will we do with this control? And here is the deeper truth most people still don't fully understand today. When a nation controls its currency, it controls the creation of money itself. And money creation is one of the most powerful forces in any economy. Because when money supply increases, it affects everything: prices, cost of living, business growth, savings value. And this is where the next layer of complexity begins, because creating money is easy, but maintaining its value is the real challenge. And this is where many developing economies struggle. Because if money supply grows faster than production, prices rise. That is what we call inflation. So now imagine this: a nation with its own currency, trying to grow, trying to develop, trying to expand its economy. Every decision about money now carries weight. Too little money, growth slows; too much money, value drops. And balancing that requires deep economic understanding. So the birth of the Naira was not just a celebration. It was a turning point, from dependence to responsibility, from external control to internal management. And this is where the story becomes even more powerful. Because once a nation has its own currency, its own central bank, its own financial authority, the next question becomes inevitable: how does that currency behave when new forces enter the system? Forces like oil discovery, global trade shifts, expanding money supply, economic growth pressures. Because control is one thing, but managing complexity is another. And this is where the next phase begins. A phase where Nigeria's new financial identity will be tested by global forces, economic expansion, and decisions that will shape generations. Now let's talk about the role of the central bank, where power becomes responsibility. After the introduction of the Nigerian Naira, something quietly shifted behind the scenes. Not in markets, not in shops, not in everyday transactions, but at the core of the financial system itself. Because now, Nigeria did not just have its own money. It needed a system to control that money, to guide it, to stabilize it, to prevent it from collapsing under its own power. And that responsibility fell into one institution, the Central Bank of Nigeria. Now pause here, because this is where most people misunderstand everything about money. People think money comes from work, salary, business, government, but that is not where money begins. Money begins at the level of control, and the central bank sits at the top of that control. It decides how much money enters the economy, how fast money circulates, how expensive borrowing becomes, how stable or unstable prices remain. Let's break that down in real terms. If the central bank increases the supply of money, more cash flows into the system, banks lend more, businesses expand, people spend more. At first, it feels like growth, like opportunity, like progress. But if that increase is not controlled, if it grows faster than actual production, something else begins to happen. Money becomes less valuable. Prices rise, cost of living increases, and people begin to feel pressure, even when they are earning more. That is inflation. Now let's go deeper. The central bank also controls interest rates. Interest rate simply means the cost of borrowing money. If interest rates are low, loans become cheaper. Businesses borrow more, spending increases. If interest rates are high, borrowing slows, spending reduces, economic activity tightens, so the central bank is constantly balancing two forces: growth and stability. Too much growth without control leads to inflation. Too much control without growth leads to stagnation, and finding that balance is one of the most difficult responsibilities in any economy. Now here is where things become even deeper, because beyond money supply and interest rates, the central bank also regulates commercial banks, financial systems, currency stability. It ensures that banks don't collapse easily. Money remains trusted, transactions remain stable. Because once trust in money is broken, everything else begins to fall apart. And this brings us to the most important shift of all, because before this era, money had something physical behind it: gold, silver, commodities. But now, with the Naira, money became something else. It became fiat. Let's simplify that completely. Fiat money means money has value, because people believe it has value, not because it is backed by gold, not because it is tied to a physical resource, but because the system behind it is trusted. And this is where the responsibility becomes heavy, because when money is based on trust, that trust must be protected. If the system is stable, trust increases, money holds value, the economy grows. If the system becomes unstable, trust weakens, money loses value, people begin to panic. And that is when currencies begin to struggle. So now think about this deeply. When Nigeria created the Naira and established control through the central bank, it did not just gain power, it accepted responsibility for the stability of its money, the confidence of its people, the direction of its economy. And this is where most people still misunderstand money today. They think, if I earn more, I am safe. But what they don't see is this: if the system managing money is unstable, even higher income can lose value over time, because money is not just about how much you earn. It is about what your money can still do tomorrow. And that depends on policy, control, discipline, long-term economic decisions. So the central bank is not just a financial institution. It is the guardian of value, the invisible hand that shapes your purchasing power, your savings, your cost of living, your financial future. And if you don't understand that, you will only focus on earning money without understanding what is happening to your money. And that is where many people lose, without realizing it. Because money is not just created, it is managed. And when management becomes complex, the system becomes harder to predict, which leads us directly into the next layer of this story. Now we embark on economical and better understanding fiat money. The Naira is what we call fiat money. Let's simplify that. Fiat money means money that has value, because the government says it does, not because it is backed by gold, not because it is tied to a physical commodity, but because there is trust in the system. So when you hold 1,000, its value is not in the paper, it is in belief. Belief that someone else will accept it. Belief that the system will remain stable. belief that it can be exchanged for goods and services. So money becomes something psychological, something collective, something dependent on trust. And this is where everything becomes fragile, because if trust is stable, money works. If trust weakens, money weakens. And this leads us to one of the most important realities in modern economies. Let's take this deeper so it doesn't just explain inflation. It exposes it. Let's go deeper on understanding the word inflation, the silent erosion of value. Now let's talk about something every Nigerian has experienced. Not once, not occasionally, but consistently. Inflation. You hear the word on the news. You hear it in conversations. You feel it in the market. But most people don't truly understand what it is doing to them. Because inflation is not loud. It does not arrive with a warning. It does not announce itself like a crisis. It is quiet, gradual, relentless. And that is what makes it dangerous. On the surface, inflation simply means prices go up. But that is not the real story. The deeper truth is this: your money becomes less powerful. Let's make this painfully simple. If 1,000 can buy a basket of food today, but next year, that same 1,000 can only buy half of that basket. What changed? Was it the food? No. Was it your effort? No. It was the value of your money. Now pause here. Because this is where the illusion breaks. Most people believe, if I earn more money, I am progressing. But inflation asks a different question. What can your money still do? Because if your income increases, but prices increase faster, you are not moving forward. You are running in place, and this is where the emotional tension begins. You wake up early, you work longer hours, you push harder. You earn more, but somehow, it still feels like it's not enough. Food is more expensive. Transport costs rise. Rent increases. Basic living becomes heavier. And you begin to question yourself. Why does it feel like I'm not progressing? But the truth is, this is not just about effort. This is structure. Because inflation is not random. It is the result of how money flows through a system. Now let's go deeper. When the Central Bank of Nigeria increases the money supply, more money enters the economy. At first, it feels positive: more liquidity, more spending, more activity. But if that increase in money is not matched by production, goods, services, real value creation, then something happens. Too much money starts chasing too few goods. And when that happens, prices rise. Not because things suddenly became more valuable, but because money became less scarce. And scarcity is what gives money strength. So when money becomes abundant, its power decreases. Now here is where the hidden damage happens. Inflation does not hit everyone equally. Those who understand systems position themselves. They invest, they build assets, they move ahead of inflation. But those who rely only on income feel it the most, because their earnings are tied to time. But inflation is not tied to time. It moves independently. So while they are working, inflation is also working, quietly reducing their savings, their purchasing power, their future options, and over time, this creates something deeper than financial pressure. It creates psychological pressure, because now life feels heavier, more demanding, less predictable. You start to feel like, no matter how much I do, it's not enough. And that feeling is not accidental. It is the result of being inside a system you don't fully understand. Because if you understood inflation deeply, you would realize something powerful: earning money is not enough. You must protect the value of your money, and protection requires understanding, strategy, positioning, because inflation is not just an economic concept. It is a force that rewards those who understand it, and quietly punishes those who don't. Now step back and connect everything. Nigeria gained control of its currency, the system expanded, money supply increased, economic activity grew, but with that growth came a hidden cost: inflation, the silent erosion, the invisible shift, the slow leak of value that most people only notice when it's already affecting their lives. And this is where money stops being theory. It becomes reality, because now, you don't just hear about money, you feel it, in your wallet, in your decisions, in your daily life. And this leads to the most important question of all. If money can lose value over time, Then how do you stay ahead of it? Because that question is what separates those who survive from those who build wealth. And that is where the deeper truth of money begins to unfold. The money expansion, oil, and the beginning of economic pressure. After 1973, Nigeria had something powerful: its own currency, its own financial authority, its own economic direction. On paper, everything looked aligned for growth. And then, something happened that changed everything. Oil. Not just discovery, but dominance. Nigeria became a major player in global oil production and joined the OPEC. At first, it felt like a breakthrough, a moment of arrival, because for the first time, large amounts of money began flowing into the country. At a scale never seen before, revenue increased, government spending expanded, infrastructure projects grew, cities began to evolve, expectations rose. It looked like success, but beneath that growth, a new dynamic quietly began to form, because this wealth was not coming from diversified production. It was coming from a single dominant source, oil. And when an economy begins to rely heavily on one source, everything else begins to adjust around it. Agriculture, which once sustained communities, started to decline. Local industries, which could have expanded production, slowed down. Because oil money made everything feel easier. Why invest deeply in multiple sectors when one resource is generating massive revenue? And this is where the system begins to shift. Not visibly at first, but structurally, because now money is entering the economy faster, and when money supply increases, without a corresponding increase in goods and services, something begins to happen. Prices start to rise. Not suddenly, not dramatically at first, but gradually, consistently, quietly. This is what we call inflation. Let's break it down simply. If there is more money chasing the same amount of goods, each unit of money becomes less powerful. So even though people are earning more, they are not necessarily buying more. Now pause and connect this to real life. You earn 100,000 today. It feels like something, but a few years later, the same 100,000 does not give you the same value. Food costs more. Transport costs more. Rent increases. Everything shifts. And this is where the misunderstanding begins. People think, I need to earn more money. But the deeper reality is, the value of money is changing. And this is where the pressure begins to build. Because now the system has changed again. Before, money was controlled externally. Then, money became sovereign. Now, money is expanding internally and interacting with global forces. Because oil is not just a local resource. It is globally priced, globally demanded, globally influenced. So Nigeria's money supply became indirectly connected to global oil markets. When oil prices rise, revenue increases, spending increases, money supply expands. When oil prices fall, revenue drops, pressure increases, instability begins. And this creates cycles: boom, expansion, spending, inflation, adjustment, over and over again. And this is where things become very real for everyday people. Because inflation does not announce itself loudly, it shows up in higher food prices, increased cost of living, reduced purchasing power, financial pressure on families, and slowly, without people fully realizing it, their relationship with money changes. They begin to work harder just to maintain the same lifestyle. They begin to chase higher income without realizing the system itself is shifting. And this is where the deeper lesson begins. Because money is not just about earning. It is about understanding how it behaves over time. And when you don't understand that behavior, you become reactive, you adjust, you struggle, you adapt. But you don't control. And this is the quiet reality many people live in today. Working harder, earning more, but still feeling like something is missing. Because the system has evolved again. From control to expansion to complexity. And here is the truth most people never fully see. Having your own currency gives you power. But managing that currency in a global system requires deep strategy, because now, Nigeria is no longer just defining its money internally. It is navigating global markets, resource dependence, inflation cycles, economic pressure. And this is where the next layer of understanding begins. Because if money can expand, if value can shift, if purchasing power can change over time, then the real question becomes, how do you protect your value inside a system that is constantly changing? And that is where the deeper truth of money begins. The reality of control, why money alone is not power. Now let's step back and connect everything you've seen. Nigeria moved from external currency control to internal currency creation, from colonial monetary systems to a sovereign financial identity, from being managed to managing itself. On the surface, that looks like full control. But here is the deeper question: does creating your own currency automatically mean you control wealth? The honest answer, no. And this is where most people misunderstand money at the deepest level, because there are two different forces at play: control of money and creation of value. They sound similar, but they are not the same. A nation can control its currency through institutions like the Central Bank of Nigeria. It can decide how much money to print, how interest rates move, how liquidity flows. That is monetary control. But wealth does not come from printing money. Wealth comes from production, innovation, trade, problem solving, scalable systems. That is value creation. And here is where the tension begins. If a nation increases money supply, but does not increase what it produces, the result is not growth, it is dilution. Because now there is more money chasing the same level of value. And when that happens, prices rise. Purchasing power drops, currency weakens. Now take it one step further. If a nation consumes more than it produces, it begins to depend on external systems. Imports increase, local production declines. Value begins to leave the system, money flows outward, while internal value remains limited. And this creates a silent imbalance, because even if money is circulating internally, real wealth is not being built at the same pace. Now pause and feel this. You can have money moving in an economy without real wealth increasing. That is the illusion. Because money is not wealth. Money is a representation of wealth. And if the underlying value is weak, the representation becomes unstable. So the real power of a nation is not just in its currency. It is in its ability to create, retain, and scale value internally. That means producing goods, building industries, creating solutions, exporting value, reducing dependency, because when value creation is strong, currency becomes stronger, not because of policy alone, but because the economy itself is producing real, measurable impact. And when value creation is weak, no amount of money printing can fix it. It only delays the reality. This is the hidden truth most people never fully understand. Money does not create wealth. Value creates wealth. Money only reflects it. So if value creation is weak, money becomes unstable. If value creation is strong, money becomes powerful. And this applies not just to nations, but to individuals, because you can earn money without creating scalable value, but long-term wealth. That comes from what you build, what you solve, what you scale. So now the question becomes personal. Are you just earning money? Or are you creating value that money represents because the system rewards value, not effort alone? And once you understand that, everything about how you approach money begins to change. This is where control becomes real, not just control of currency, but control of value creation itself. And that is the line between participating in an economy and shaping your position inside it. Now, pause, not for effect, but for understanding. Because everything you've just seen, from the birth of the Nigerian Naira, to the role of the Central Bank of Nigeria, to inflation, to value creation, none of it exists in isolation. It is one continuous story, one evolving system, one pattern that has been repeating across history. Let's connect it. You started this journey from the beginning of money itself, when money was not paper, not numbers, not currency, it was energy. In the earliest human societies, your ability to hunt, to protect, to survive, that was your value, that was your currency. But energy had a limitation. It could not be stored, it could not scale, it could not be transferred across time, so humanity evolved. Land became wealth. Now value could be produced repeatedly, stored, expanded, controlled. But land had limitations too. It was fixed. It required labor. It was not easily transferable. So trade emerged, barter systems, exchange of goods, value moving between people. But barter failed at scale. So currency was introduced, cowries, coins, standardized value, portable, measurable, transferable. And then, control entered the system, colonial systems, external structures, monetary frameworks imposed from outside, where value was not just created, but extracted. Then came independence. Nigeria stepped into sovereignty, created its own currency, the Naira. And for the first time, control moved inward, but control alone was not the end of the story, because then came the next phase. The system expanded, money supply increased, economic activity grew, while revenue surged, global systems connected, and with expansion came complexity, and from that complexity came something subtle but powerful, inflation, the silent erosion, the moment where people began to feel that something was changing, working harder, earning more, but not necessarily moving forward. And now, we arrive at the deepest layer of all, the realization that changes everything, because after all these phases, after all these evolutions, after all these systems, one truth remains constant. Money has never stood still, it has always evolved. From energy, to land, to trade, to currency, to control, to time, and now, to fiat systems. Each phase brought opportunity and limitation. Each system created winners and those left behind. And the difference between the two was never effort alone, it was understanding. Understanding what changed, understanding how value moved, understanding where power shifted. So now the question is no longer, do we have our own currency? That question has already been answered. The real question now is, how is value being created inside the system we are using? Because that answer determines everything. It determines whether money grows or loses value, whether people build wealth or stay in survival, whether a nation progresses or struggles under pressure. And it determines something even more personal, where you stand inside the system. Because once you understand this shift, you stop chasing money blindly. And you start asking better questions. Where is value being created? How is it being scaled? Who is controlling it? And how can I position myself within it? Because money will continue to evolve. The system will continue to shift. But those who see the pattern early don't just adapt, they position. And those who position
Now
early
let examine
don't
this
just survive the
framework
system,
called
they
the
win
invisible
invisible power framework. Core idea, money did not just evolve, it became less visible and more powerful. From energy you could feel it, land you could see it, trade you could negotiate it, currency you could hold it, control you could sense it, time you could measure it, and now, fiat money. You cannot see its true value, you can only believe it. And the moment value becomes belief, power becomes invisible. Let's talk about the generation that never questioned money. Imagine this, not one person, but 3 generations, a grandfather, a father, and a son, 3 lives, inside one evolving system. The age of real value. The grandfather lives in a time when value is physical. He wakes up early, walks on soil, touches what he produces, palm oil, cocoa, food. His wealth is not numbers, it is output. If he works, he sees the result. If he trades, he understands the exchange. Nothing is hidden, nothing is abstract. If something is valuable, it is visible. He does not need a bank balance to feel secure. He looks at his land, his goods, his community, and he understands where he stands. There is clarity, there is direct connection between effort and outcome. The age of transition, now his son grows up, and the world is changing. Colonial systems fade, independence comes. A new identity is formed. Then comes something unfamiliar, a new currency, the Naira. At first, it feels like progress, modernization, structure, national pride. He no longer needs to carry goods to trade. He can carry value in his pocket. But something subtle begins to happen. He no longer measures value by what he produces, but by what he is paid. He leaves the farm, moves closer to the city, finds work, earns salary, Now instead of owning output, he earns income. At first, it feels easier, predictable, structured, but slowly, control begins to shift. Because now, his income is determined by someone else. His time is structured by someone else. His value is priced by someone else. And he adapts, because the system feels stable. And stability feels safe, the age of invisible money. Now the son grows up. This is the modern Nigerian. He has never seen life without structured money. He does not question salary. He does not question bank balances. He does not question digital numbers, because to him, this is normal. He goes to school, learns to pass exams, learns to follow systems, learns to prepare for employment. He is told, get a good job, earn well, be successful. And he believes it, because everyone else believes it. Then life begins. He gets paid. His phone vibrates. Bank alert. And for a moment, he feels powerful. But then something strange begins to happen. Not immediately, not suddenly, gradually, prices rise. Transport increases, food becomes expensive, rent climbs. And he starts asking questions silently. I am earning more. So why does it feel like I have less? That question is the beginning of awareness. One night, he sits quietly, no noise, no distractions, just thoughts, and for the first time, he asks a dangerous question. What exactly is money? Not salary, not alert, not numbers, but money itself. And suddenly, everything begins to feel uncertain, because he realizes he has spent his entire life using something he does not fully understand, trusting something he never questioned, building a life around a system he never examined. Now let's step out of the story and into reality. Because this confusion is not imagination. It has happened again and again. The era of Naira devaluation, 1980s, 1990s. There was a time in Nigeria when the value of money changed drastically. Not because people became less hardworking, not because effort reduced, but because the system shifted, policies changed, currency weakened, and suddenly, what used to be enough was no longer enough. Families felt it, workers felt it, entire generations felt it. People who thought they were secure realized something painful. Money can lose power, even when you don't lose effort. The oil dependency reality. Then came another realization. Nigeria's wealth was heavily tied to oil. When oil prices were high, everything felt stable. When oil prices dropped, everything felt pressure. And people began to feel something they could not explain. Why does my life depend on something I don't control? That question is the beginning of economic awareness. The digital money era, modern day. Now we are in a new phase. Money is no longer physical. You don't hold it. You don't count it. You don't feel it. You see numbers on a screen, transfers, alerts, balances, and because money is now invisible, its behavior becomes harder to track. Spending becomes emotional. Saving becomes psychological. Value becomes abstract. And when something becomes abstract, it becomes easier to misunderstand. Now bring everything together. The grandfather understood value. The father adapted to money. The son inherited the system. But here is the truth. Each generation moved further away from understanding and closer to dependency. And that is the real danger. Not poverty, not lack of opportunity, but lack of awareness. Because when you don't understand money, you cannot see how it changes. And when you cannot see change, you cannot prepare for it. And when you cannot prepare for it, you become controlled by it. So now ask yourself honestly, not as a viewer, but as someone living inside this system, do you understand money? Or have you just learned how to survive with it? Because those two are not the same. One leads to repetition, the other leads to transformation. And this is where the episode changes direction. Because the goal is not to reject money, the goal is to see it clearly. To understand that money is not the goal, money is the tool. And the real power comes from understanding the system behind it. Everything you've seen so far did not happen in isolation. Nigeria's money story is part of a much bigger system, a global evolution of control, trust, and value. So to truly understand the Naira, you must understand the world that defines money itself. The industrial shift global foundation. We go back to the moment that changed everything globally, the Industrial Revolution. Factories replaced farms, production scaled massively. Countries like Britain, France, and others needed one thing: raw materials. And they needed it consistently. This is where Africa, including Nigeria, became important. Not as industrial powers, but as suppliers. Palm oil, cocoa, rubber, resources flowed outward, finished goods flowed inward. And this created a global structure. Some nations produce raw value. Others process and multiply it. That imbalance still echoes today. The gold standard trust with limits. As global trade expanded, countries needed a stable way to trust each other's money. So they introduced something called the gold standard. Simple idea: every unit of money printed was backed by a fixed amount of gold. So if a country printed too much money, it needed more gold to support it. This created discipline, stability, and trust. Because money had a physical anchor. But here was the limitation: growth became restricted. Because you cannot expand gold easily. And as the world economy grew, this system became too rigid. The Bretton Woods Agreement, the new order. After World War II, the world needed a new system. So global leaders came together and created a new structure. Under Bretton Woods, the US dollar became the central currency. And it was tied to gold. Other currencies were tied to the dollar. So instead of gold directly, countries trusted the dollar. And because the United States was economically strong, the system worked for a while. The Nixon shock, the breaking point. Then in 1971, everything changed. The US made a decision. They stopped linking the dollar to gold. That moment is called the Nixon shock. And it changed money forever. Because from that point on, money was no longer backed by gold. It became fiat, just like the Naira, just like most currencies today. Meaning, money now depends on trust in governments, not physical assets. And this is the system Nigeria entered in 1973. When the Naira was introduced, so understand this clearly, Nigeria did not create fiat money. It joined a global shift into fiat systems. The oil system, power and dependency. Now another layer is added. Oil becomes one of the most important global resources. And something critical happens: oil is traded globally in US dollars. This creates what is known as a petrodollar system. Meaning, countries that need oil must hold dollars. And countries that produce oil earn dollars. Nigeria becomes part of this system. So even though Nigeria has its own currency, Naira, its economy is still influenced by global oil prices, dollar strength, international demand. So now you see something powerful. National money exists, but global systems still influence its value. Global inflation and modern economies. Today, almost every country operates under fiat money, which means money can be printed, expanded, adjusted, and when this happens globally, inflation becomes a shared experience. Prices rise worldwide, currencies fluctuate, and economic pressure moves across borders. So when things feel expensive in Nigeria, it is not always local, it is often global. And most people don't see that connection. The digital economy, the new power shift. Now we are entering a new phase. Money is becoming digital. Platforms control transactions. Data controls decisions. Attention creates value. And something important is happening. Power is shifting again, not just from governments, but toward systems, online systems, global platforms, digital networks, and just like before, those who understand the system early. Position early. Now step back, look at the full picture. From gold, to dollar, to fiat, to digital, money has never been stable. It has always evolved with power structures, and every time it changes. Two types of people emerge: those who understand early, and those who adapt late, and the difference between them is not intelligence, it is awareness. So now ask yourself, are you operating based on what money used to be, or what it is becoming? Because if you are using old thinking in a new system, you will always feel behind. Not because you are not working hard, but because the system has moved ahead of you. Nigeria is not isolated. It is part of a global financial ecosystem. Which means, to build wealth today, you must think beyond borders, beyond local systems. Beyond traditional structures, you must understand where money is flowing globally, how value is being created globally, and how to position yourself within it. Because money no longer respects location, only value. Now pause here for a moment, because what money really is has gone beyond everything you've been taught either in school or in society at large, and remove everything you think you know about money. Not salary, not bank alerts, not Naira notes, not numbers on your phone. Strip it all away, because until you do that, you will keep mistaking the form of money for the truth of money. Truth 1. Money is stored human time. At the deepest level, money is time, not in theory, in reality. Think about it. Every Naira you earn represents hours of your life. Energy you used, focus you gave, effort you invested, a part of your life. Converted into a number, so when you spend money, you are not just spending currency. You are spending your past time, and when you waste money, you are wasting time you can never get back. Now pause, because this changes everything. If money is time, then wealth is not just money. Wealth is control over time. And the question becomes, do you control your time? Or is your time controlled by money? Truth 2. Money is transferable value. Money is not value itself. It is a carrier of value, a transfer system, a bridge. It allows value to move from one person to another, so when someone pays you, they are not giving you money. They are giving you recognition for value you created, a problem you solved, a need you met. And that means, if you are not earning enough, the real question is not, how can I get more money? The real question is, what value am I transferring, and to how many people? Because money follows value, always. Truth 3. Money is proof of problems solved. This is where most people get it wrong. They chase money directly, instead of understanding what creates it. Money is not random, it is not emotional, it is not based on effort alone. Money is a receipt, proof, that something useful has been done. If you solve a small problem, you get small money. If you solve a bigger problem, you get bigger money. If you solve a problem for many people, you create scale. And scale is where wealth lives. So understand this deeply. You don't earn money because you work hard. You earn money because you solve problems. Truth 4. Money rewards scale, not just effort. Now connect this to everything you've learned. In the salary system, your time is limited. So your income is limited, because you can only solve problems for a limited number of hours. But in systems, value can scale. One idea can reach thousands, millions, without repeating effort every hour. That is the difference between working for money and building something that produces money. And this is why some people work harder than others, but never become wealthy, because effort alone does not scale. Truth 5. Fiat money changes the game completely. Now bring it back to episode 8, fiat money. Money backed by government trust, not gold, not physical value. Just belief. This changes everything, because now, money can be created, expanded, adjusted, and when more money enters the system, without equal increase in value, what happens? Money loses power. This is called inflation. Let's simplify it. If there is more money chasing the same goods, prices go up. Your money buys less, so even if you earn more, you may not actually have more value. And that is why many people feel like they are running, but not moving forward. Because the system is moving faster than their understanding. Now combine everything. You earn money time. You receive money value transfer. You spend money exchange, but the system can change money's value. Without asking you, without informing you, without your control. That is the invisible trap. And this is why understanding money is not optional. It is survival. So now the perspective must change. Stop seeing money as something to chase. Start seeing money as something to understand. Because once you understand, that money is time. That money follows value. That money rewards scale. That money changes based on systems. You stop reacting to money, and you start positioning yourself ahead of it. So ask yourself honestly, not emotionally, not casually, but deeply, are you building a life where your time is constantly exchanged for money? Or are you building a system where value works for you, even when you are not working? because the answer to that question determines everything: your income, your freedom, your future. Money is not your enemy. Money is not your goal. Money is a mirror. It reflects how you use your time, how you create value, how you position yourself in systems. And if the reflection is not what you want, the solution is not to chase more money. The solution is to change how you think, how you act, and how you build. Everything you've seen in this episode, from cowries to colonial control, to the birth of the Naira, to fiat money, to global systems, is not just history, it is your current environment. You are not outside this system. You are inside it, living in it, earning through it, spending within it, and whether you realize it or not, it is shaping your financial life every single day. Reality 1. Salary is not security. Let's be honest, many people believe, if I earn well, I am safe, but now you see the truth. Salary is tied to time, employment, external control, and time is limited. Jobs are not permanent. Systems change, policies change, currencies change, so what feels stable today can shift tomorrow, not because you failed, but because the system moved. That is why a job can sustain you, but it cannot guarantee your future. Reality 2. Wealth is built through systems, not ours. Now flip your thinking. If money is stored time, transferable value, proof of problems solved, then wealth comes from one thing: scale. And scale comes from systems, not effort alone. A system allows you to create value once and get rewarded repeatedly without trading your time every hour. That is why a business can grow beyond the owner. A digital product can sell globally. A platform can generate income continuously. So the shift is this: stop asking, how can I work more? Start asking, how can I build something that works without me every moment? Reality 3. The world is nitrogen monoxide longer local. There was a time when location limited opportunity. That time is gone. Today, a skill can reach global markets. A service can be delivered online. A product can be sold internationally. Money flows where value is, not where you are. So if your mindset is still local, your income will feel limited. But when your thinking becomes global, your opportunities expand. Reality 4. Digital skills are the new leverage. In the past, land was leverage. Factories were leverage. Capital was leverage. Today, digital systems are leverage. Skills like content creation, marketing, technology, data, online business allow you to create value at scale across borders without needing permission from traditional systems. This is the new shift, and those who understand it early position themselves differently. Reality 5. You are either consuming the system or building within it every day. You are participating in the system. But the question is, how are you consuming content? Spending money, reacting to trends, or are you creating value? Building systems, positioning for growth. Because the same system that traps people also creates millionaires. The difference is not the system. The difference is how you engage with it. This is where everything connects to your journey. Becoming the first millionaire in your family is not luck. It is not just hard work. It is not just motivation. It is awareness applied early. It is seeing what others don't see, understanding what others ignore, positioning before others react, because every generation has access to opportunities, but only a few recognize them early enough. You must stop seeing yourself as someone trying to survive, and start seeing yourself as someone learning to navigate systems, because once you understand systems, you stop depending on one income. You start creating multiple value streams. You stop reacting to change. You start preparing for it. Most people work harder when money is low, save more when things feel unstable, hope things improve over time, but they never ask, how does this system actually work? So they repeat cycles, year after year. Effort increases, but results remain limited, not because they are lazy, but because they are operating without system awareness. From this moment, you must begin to think differently, not emotionally, not socially, but strategically. When you earn money, ask, what value created this? When you spend money, ask, what am I really exchanging here? When you see opportunities, ask, Does this scale? Or does it trap my time? This is how thinkers become builders. You don't need to know everything. But you must know enough to recognize patterns. Understand systems, position early, because the goal is not to escape money. The goal is to use money intelligently, right now. You are not the same person who started this episode, because now you see something most people never see, that money is not just something you earn, it is something you must understand deeply. And once you understand it, you cannot go back to thinking small. So now answer this honestly. Will you continue living inside the system, reacting to it, or will you begin to understand it and position yourself ahead of it, because that decision is the beginning of your transformation. There is a quiet danger in life, not ignorance, but thinking you understand something when you actually don't. And that is what money has been for most people, familiar, but misunderstood. Used every day, but never truly questioned. Because from everything you've seen in this journey, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Money is not neutral. It has never been. It is shaped by systems, designed by people, influenced by power. And when you don't understand those systems, you don't just use money. You get used by it. Another truth begins to settle in, slowly, but deeply. Effort alone is not the highest currency. This is hard to accept, because many people were raised to believe, work harder, and you will succeed. But history has shown something different. There were farmers who worked harder than kings, yet never became powerful. There were workers who labored for decades, yet never became wealthy, not because they lacked discipline, but because they operated inside systems they did not control. So now you begin to see it clearly. Systems determine outcomes more than effort alone. And once you see that, you can never go back to thinking small again. Then comes another realization, one that changes how you look at wealthy people. Wealth flows toward control. Control of land, control of production, control of systems, control of distribution. And today, control of attention, control of digital platforms. So when you see wealth, don't just see money. Ask, what system is being controlled here? Because that is where the real power is hidden. And then, the deepest lesson of all begins to settle. History is not behind you. It is inside your present reality. The colonial systems you learned about did not disappear. They evolved. The control structures did not end. They transformed. The patterns did not stop. They became harder to recognize. And that is why many people feel stuck today, without knowing why. Because they are living inside systems they never studied. So now everything comes together into one final truth. Understanding money is understanding power. Not power over others, but power over your own life. The power to choose differently. The power to see opportunities early. The power to break cycles that have repeated for generations. Now this is where everything becomes real. Because if you watch this, feel inspired, and do nothing, then this entire episode becomes entertainment. And that is not why you are here. 1. Start studying money like your life depends on it. Because in many ways, it does, not casually. Not once in a while, but intentionally. Start asking deeper questions. How is money created? Who controls it? What affects its value? Where is it flowing right now? Because once you understand the system, you stop being confused by it. And confusion is what keeps people stuck. 2. Build skills that can escape limitations, right now. Your income may be tied to location, time, employment, but the world has changed. There are skills today that are not limited by any of those. Skills that allow you to work globally, create value digitally, scale your output. These are not optional anymore. They are necessary, because the system has moved. And if you don't move with it, you fall behind without realizing it. 3. Break your dependence on one income source. This is critical, because one source of income is one point of vulnerability, and in a system that constantly shifts, that is dangerous. Start small if you must. But start a second stream, a side system, a value channel, something that grows, even when your primary income is under pressure. Because true security is not one stable income, it is multiple controlled streams. 4. Study history, not for memory, but for strategy. Everything you are seeing today has happened before, in different forms, different names, but the same patterns, and those who study these patterns don't panic during change. They prepare for it, so instead of reacting late, you begin to position early, and that is where the advantage is built. 5. Position yourself where value is going, not where it used to be. This is where most people make their biggest mistake. They chase stability in systems that are already slowing down, instead of positioning in systems that are growing. So ask yourself, where is attention moving? Where is money flowing? Where is value increasing? And begin to align yourself there, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it feels new, because growth is always unfamiliar at first. If you do nothing, nothing changes, not your income, not your lifestyle, not your future. But if you apply even one thing from this consistently, your trajectory begins to shift. Not overnight, but over time. And that is how real transformation happens. Right now, you are not confused anymore. You are aware, and awareness creates responsibility. Because once you see something clearly, you can no longer pretend you don't. So now ask yourself, and answer honestly, will you continue living the same way, with new understanding? Or will you start making small, intentional changes that lead to a completely different future? Because that choice is the difference between knowing and becoming. Right now, something has shifted, not around you, but within you. Because you are no longer just looking at money. You are seeing through it. You now understand that money is not just paper, not just numbers, not just alerts on your phone. It is a system, a structure, a force that shapes decisions, lifestyles, and entire generations. And the truth is, most people will go their entire lives using money without ever understanding it. They will work, earn, spend, repeat, year after year, without ever stepping outside the pattern, not because they are incapable, but because they were never shown what you are seeing right now. But you are different now, because awareness changes everything. Once you see the system, you cannot unsee it. Once you understand the pattern, you cannot unknow it. And once that shift happens, one question begins to follow you everywhere. If I now understand how this works, why would I continue living the same way? And this is exactly why I created this book, The First Millionaire in Your Family. Not as motivation, not as theory, but as a complete structure, a guide that takes everything you felt in this episode and turns it into something you can actually apply, step by step, principle by principle, decision by decision. Because let's be honest, understanding is powerful, but structured understanding is life-changing. And that is what this book gives you. It breaks down how money actually works, how systems are built, how wealth is created and sustained, and how you can position yourself ahead of it. Not someday, not when everything is perfect, but starting from where you are right now. And the truth is, people who have read it don't just finish it, they feel it. They see things differently. They move differently. They think differently. Some of the things they say, it completely changed how I see money. I finally understand why I've been stuck. It gave me clarity I've been searching for, because for the first time, things start to make sense, not just financially, but mentally, strategically, personally. So if something inside you right now feels different, if something inside you is telling you, this is deeper than what I've been taught, then don't ignore that feeling. Because that is awareness trying to become action. The link is in the description. Get the book, don't just read it casually. Study it, sit with it, apply it. Because this journey is not about watching videos. It is not about collecting information. It is about transformation, real, visible, lasting transformation. And here is the truth most people won't say. You don't become the first millionaire in your family by accident. You become it by seeing differently, thinking differently, and moving differently, long before others do. So now the question is no longer, can I succeed? The real question is, now that I see the system clearly, will I rise above it, or remain inside it? Because the system will keep moving. Money will keep evolving, opportunities will keep shifting, and only those who evolve with it will benefit from it. So take this moment seriously. Because moments like this, quiet, reflective, awakening, they don't come often. Subscribe, stay connected to this journey, Because this is not just a series. This is a transformation process, and remember this. Very carefully, money will not change your life. Understanding money will. To be continued. You now understand something most people never fully see, that money is not just a tool. It is a system that evolves, and every time it evolves, entire societies are forced to adapt. But here is what history keeps repeating. In every era we have studied, when value shifts, when systems expand, when control changes hands, those who are not paying attention don't notice the change until it is already shaping their lives. Because first, it was energy, then land, then trade, then currency, then colonial control, then industrial wages, then national sovereignty. And now, a new force enters the story. One that does not replace money, but multiplies its flow, and changes its behavior completely, something discovered beneath the ground, that suddenly reshapes everything above it. A resource that does not just generate income, but redefines national dependence. At first, it feels like progress, like arrival, like a breakthrough moment for a nation stepping into global relevance. Money begins to flow faster than ever before, economies expand, cities grow, budgets increase, life feels like it is moving upward. But underneath that growth, a quiet shift begins. Because when money starts flowing from a single dominant source, everything else slowly begins to adjust around it. Industries weaken, diversification slows, dependency grows quietly, and over time, what once looked like strength becomes vulnerability. Then something global enters the equation. Not just local policy, not just national economics, but international influence. Oil becomes more than a resource. It becomes a global currency anchor, a geopolitical tool, a system of influence that connects nations far beyond borders. And suddenly, money is no longer just created internally. It is influenced externally by global demand, global pricing, global decisions. And this is where the tension begins, because when money supply expands, prices begin to shift. When dependence increases, stability becomes fragile. And when expectations rise faster than production, inflation quietly begins to appear, not as a single event, but as a cycle. A pressure, a silent force that reduces purchasing power. Even when numbers look higher on paper, and here is the part most people never fully understand. Inflation does not always feel like loss. At first, it feels like movement, growth, activity, but slowly, it begins to reshape reality. What once felt affordable becomes expensive. What once felt stable becomes uncertain. And what once felt predictable becomes volatile. So now the question is no longer just about money. It is about structure. It is about dependence. It is about how a nation responds when its primary source of wealth begins to dominate everything else, because every system we have studied so far, from cowries to colonial currency to salary systems, has been leading to this same realization. When money becomes concentrated in one direction, it changes the behavior of everything around it. And this is where episode 9 begins, not with answers, but with a deeper question. What happens to a nation's economy when its wealth is tied to something it does not fully control? Because what looks like abundance can sometimes hide imbalance, and what looks like progress can sometimes conceal dependency. And in the next chapter of this journey, we uncover how oil did not just change Nigeria's economy. It changed the rhythm of money itself, inflation, expansion, dependency, cycles that continue to shape reality today. And once you see it, you will never look at money the same way again. To be continued. This channel is not about motivation. It is about transformation. Every video you watch here is one step closer to becoming the first millionaire in your family. Not through luck, not through hype, but through discipline, structure, and long-term thinking. We are building thinkers. We are building investors. We are building legacy creators. And if you stay here long enough, apply what you learn, and study the blueprint inside the first millionaire in your family, you won't just change your income, you'll change your bloodline. So if this video shifted your thinking even a little, subscribe, because this is not just content. This is preparation. And 10 years from now, you'll either look back and say, I started when it was small. Or, I wish I did. Choose wisely. I'll see you in the next lesson.